Nah, sekitar segitu ya, itu kan harusnya datang Biden sama Putin. So that will be like a momentum buat Indonesia untuk to show the upper hand as the president of G20 gitu. Seperti apa nih yang kita bisa mainkan perannya? Yang paling pas untuk menjelaskan ini, we have Professor Kishore Mahbubani live from Singapore. Professor Mahbubani is a distinguished fellow National University of Singapore dan anggota Dewan Penasehat Golkar Institute dan juga a well-renowned public figure yang selalu masuk dalam daftar top 100 public intellectuals in the world oleh majalah Foreign Policy dan Financial Times. Dan juga banyak sekali buku-buku yang sudah ditulis oleh Profesor Kishore. Has China Won on Your Background? I actually bought that book yesterday, Professor, in order to speak to you today. However, I'm not a speed reader, so I don't have much, questions from that book. However, we want to talk more how China play its role in the current geopolitical upheaval. Without further ado, I would like to invite Mas Mulya Amri, kepala sekolahnya atau kita semuanya dari Golkar Institute to deliver his welcoming remarks. Mas Muli, silakan. The floor is yours.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andini. Good morning, Professor Kishore. And greetings to all of us. Greetings to you from all of us at Golkar Institute. Best regards from Minister Airlangga, Pak Aceh, and Pak Erwin, and Pak Rizal to you. So I am given this great honor to give a little bit more of an introduction to Professor Kishore Mahbubani and encourage you to ask questions as you always do, and take this opportunity to also thank Kishore. Kishore has had two illustrious careers, both as a diplomat as well as a public intellectual. Andini has mentioned about his role as public intellectual, but as a diplomat, Kishore was with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Singapore, and he held the position of Singapore's ambassador to the United Nations twice, and he was also the president of the UN Security Council in 2001 to 2002. But I've known Pak Kishore first and foremost as my dean. After his career as a diplomat, Pak Kishore then became an intellectual, and he founded the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, which has now become one of the top public policy schools in the world. And that is where I got my PhD. That is where I had the pleasure of interacting and learning much from Pak Kishore about how to be an intellectual, how to think strategically. And Yandini was right, he's a world-class strategic thinker and a provocateur as well, that will provoke you to think critically about what is going on in the world. And of course, his books are best-selling everywhere. Last year, he became very famous, and still, as Pak Rizal Malarangeng say, he is the most famous Singaporean in Indonesia. And last year, he wrote a brilliant piece at Project Syndicate, which is titled The Genius of Jokowi. And so I highly encourage you to take this opportunity. It is very rare that we get this opportunity to interact live with Pak Kishore, so you can ask questions, hear his reply, and even ask more questions if you like. Take this opportunity. I know you all have a lot on your mind about what's going on in the changing world. Yesterday we had a session on Indonesia's defense and how that is influenced by the geopolitical conditions. So Pak Kishore will talk about that. That is his forte. Take this opportunity. And of course, I'm also using this chance to thank Pak Kishore very much. Thank you for being a friend to Indonesia. Thank you for being an advisor to Golkar Institute. And thank you for always supporting our effort to create prosperity and stability in the region, in Southeast Asia, in Asia, and in the world. Thank you, Pak Kishore. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andini and Mulya, and thank you for your warm and generous remarks. I want to mention at the outset that, Andini very nicely bought a copy of Has China Won? I also want to mention this book that just came out in January this year. The good news is that this is a free book. You can go to the Springer website and download it free of charge. And I'm actually surprised that since it came out in January, in 2 months, it's been downloaded 1.1 million times in over 90 countries. I'm actually quite shocked. 1.1 million times in over 90 countries. So it shows you that the whole world is interested in finding out where the 21st century will be the Asian century. And that's also the backdrop today. So what I plan to do, of course, is to talk primarily about the US-China geopolitical contest, because I guarantee you that no matter what you do, no matter where you live, your life will be affected in one way or another by this US-China geopolitical contest that has begun and will gain momentum in the next few decades. But at the same time, in the short term, our lives are also being disrupted by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I also plan to talk about that later. And of course, Andini is right. Indonesia's chairmanship of G20 2022 was supposed to be a good year, The world was going to recover from COVID-19. The world economy will grow very fast. And Indonesia would become chairman of G20 at a very good time. Unfortunately, life is always full of surprises. And Indonesia is going to become chairman of G20 in a very challenging year. It will not be easy for Indonesia as chairman of G20 this year. So that's the backdrop against which I'm speaking. So I plan to divide my remarks into 5 parts. Part 1, I'll speak about what are the structural forces driving this US-China contest. I can tell you, when future historians write about our times, they'll mention the invasion of Ukraine, but it is a sideshow. The real big game is still between US and China. So it's important to understand the structural forces that are driving this contest. And secondly, I'll ask what are the mistakes that were made by both sides, US and China, in this contest, and how that has aggravated the contest. Then I'll talk in part 3 about who will win. Will the US win or will China win? And of course, that's a question that everybody wants to know. The answer is very complicated to find out. Then in part 4, I'm going to bring in the Ukraine dimension. How has this Russian invasion of Ukraine changed the equation on the US-China contest? And finally, I'll talk about what can we do to prevent worst-case scenarios, and perhaps here talk a little bit about Indonesia's G20 chairmanship and what Indonesia should try to do on this subject. So that's the 5-part structure of what I'm going to talk about. So first of all, let me talk about the structural forces driving this contest. And you have to understand the structural forces so that you understand that no matter what happens, the US-China geopolitical contest will gain momentum in the next 10 to 20 years. And why am I confident? It's because of 3 structural forces. The first structural force is that has been around for 2,000 years or more. And everyone is speaking about this force, which is that whenever the world's #1 emerging power, which today is China, is about to overtake the world's #1 power, which today is United States of America, the world's number one power always pushes down the world's number one emerging power. This has been true throughout history for thousands of years. So which is why a Harvard professor, Graham Allison, has written about this, and he calls it the Thucydides trap. But that's the same idea, that always rising powers rise against established powers, and then they clash. And so for that reason, I'm very confident that this contest will carry on. And you notice that this contest was started by President Donald Trump, and after Donald Trump left, Joe Biden came. President Joe Biden reversed many of Trump's policies, but he didn't reverse any of Trump's policies on China. So it shows you that it's not driven by personalities, it's not driven by Trump, it's driven by deep structural forces. The first one, everyone speaks about. The second structural force, nobody speaks about except me. And this is, of course, there has been in the Western psyche, deep down, buried down there, a fear of the yellow peril. And this goes back to 800 years ago, when the Mongols, as you know, came close to conquering Europe. And that fear of being conquered by the Mongols led to a deep-seated psychological fear of, being conquered by yellow people. So as a result of that, there's always been this fear of the yellow peril, and that's at play now in the US-China contest. And you would, when you say, well, that's about Europe, why does it involve the United States? Well, the United States is still very much, as you know, a child and not a major member of the Western civilization. And in American history, if you go back and read American history, way back in the 1890s, the United States Congress passed an act called the Chinese Racial Exclusion Act, right? So why would the US Congress pass a Chinese Racial Exclusion Act to keep out the Chinese? That was because of the fear of the yellow peril. And I want to emphasize the yellow peril dimension, because you assume that when it comes to geopolitics, people make their decisions calmly, rationally, but actually in geopolitics, emotions play a role also. And this yellow peril has created a strong emotional dimension in the US-China contest that we should be aware about also. And which also explains why this contest will carry on. And of course, the third structural force that's driving this US-China contest is a kind of a bipartisan consensus in the United States that China has let the United States down. Now, how has China let the United States down? Well, the Americans believe, quite sincerely, that when the Americans engaged China economically, as they did from the 1980s, 1990s, 2000s, that United States would first open up the Chinese economy, and after opening up the Chinese economy, they would then open up the Chinese political system, and China would become a liberal democracy, just like United States of America. And as you know, China has not become a liberal democracy like the United States of America, and therefore the Americans feel that the Chinese have cheated America. Now you may think this is a bit bizarre. Surely the Americans are not so naive as to believe that they can transform China's political system. But fortunately, one of the senior officials in the current Biden administration, in fact, he's the chief American policymaker on Asian matters, and I know him also. His name is Kurt Campbell. He came out with an article in the magazine Foreign Affairs, pointing out that for a long time, this is exactly what the American policymakers believe, that they would open up China's economy, open up China's political system. China would become like America, and then they would live happily ever after. And of course, that hasn't happened, and the Americans blame China for not opening up its political system. And later we can discuss whether or not that's a reasonable belief on the part of the Americans to have or not. So you can see these are the structural forces driving this contest. So it doesn't matter who's president, Trump as president or Biden as president. And by the way, Trump may come back as president in 2024, but then the contest will still carry on. It doesn't matter. It's driven by structural forces. But at the same time, and this brings me to part two of my remarks, this contest is also driven by mistakes that have been made by both sides. And I'll talk about the mistakes. And in the case of China, the big mistake that China made, and this is why I devote a chapter of my book to discussing this mistake, and this is that China has alienated American businessmen and the American business community. And why is that important? Because in the past, whenever there were problems between the United States and China in the 1980s, 1990s, even 2000s, whenever the United States wanted to apply pressure on China, the US business community would say, stop, you are damaging my business. Be careful, right? So, so that was a way of making sure that the US would never apply too much pressure on China. But unfortunately, the Chinese officials, for whatever reason, became arrogant, maybe after the global financial crisis of 2007, 2008, and then they decided that they didn't need the American business community. And if you want to find out what the American business community was unhappy about, you can read it openly in open sources. If you look at the website of the US Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai, the website of the US Chamber of Commerce in Beijing, they complain about the fact that they have to share their technology, they lose intellectual property, that there's no level playing field in the competition between Chinese and American companies. This is all open information. But you also find it in my book. And by the way, I want to mention, just as an aside, the good news that my book has China One will be published soon in Bahasa Indonesia. It should be coming out in a few months' time, and I'll let you know when it comes out, so you can read it in Bahasa Indonesia also. But anyway, when the book comes to Indonesia, please read chapter 2, and you will see the mistakes that were made by the Chinese side in alienating American businessmen. And of course, we can discuss later whether or not these mistakes can be rectified. But at the same time, the United States has also made a mistake in managing China. But the United States mistake is a much more serious one. And it's like a big mistake because the United States has basically launched this contest against China without first working out a comprehensive long-term strategy. Now, you may think this is not possible. United States has got the best strategic think tanks, the best universities, the best known strategic thinkers. Surely United States wouldn't do this, wouldn't launch a contest against China without having a strategy. But I can say this with some confidence because the source for my claim that the United States doesn't have a strategy is one of America's best known strategic thinkers, and his name is Henry Kissinger. And I can tell you that when I was doing research for my book, Has China Won? I went to New York and I had a one-on-one lunch with Henry Kissinger. And at that lunch, he told me, the message he gave to me was that the United States doesn't have a strategy for managing the rise of China. And of course, this is also confirmed subsequently by events and developments, right? For example, if you, and this is what I've written about in an article published in the National Interest in the year 2021. The way to confirm that the United States doesn't have a strategy is to ask yourself a simple question. What are the objectives of the American, geopolitical contest that it has launched against China? And if you try to ask an American policymaker, what are your objectives? What are you trying to achieve? You cannot get a straight answer, right? So, for example, I give you some hypothetical objectives. One is the United States trying to overthrow the Chinese Communist Party in the way that it actually succeeded in overthrowing the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, right? And if that's the objective, it cannot be done because the Chinese Communist Party remains very, very popular in China. And I can tell you that there's a Harvard Kennedy School objective academic peer-reviewed study that showed that in the last 2 decades, support for the Chinese Communist Party has gone up from 86% to 93%, right? And that's not surprising because the Chinese people have enjoyed the greatest improvement in their standard of living in the past 30, 40 years. In fact, they've had the best improvement in their standard of living in 30 years over a 3,000-year history. So if the Chinese people are so much better off under the Chinese Communist Party rule, why would they want to overthrow the Chinese Communist Party? So clearly that cannot be the objective. Secondly, is the United States trying to contain China in the way that it successfully contained the Soviet Union in the Cold War, right? And as you know, the American containment policy succeeded. And one reason why it succeeded is because the United States had very strong allies in the Cold War against the Soviet Union. It had allies like Western Europe, it had allies like Japan and South Korea. It also had allies in the developing world, so Egypt, Pakistan, Indonesia were also allies of United States in the Cold War. And of course, paradoxically, China was a big ally of United States, implicit ally against the Soviet Union in the Cold War. But today, you find that very few countries want to join a containment policy against China because most countries in the world do more trade with China than they do with United States of America. So most countries in the world are not going to sacrifice their own interests to join a containment policy against China. So that's another objective that's also not feasible. And of course, the third possible objective that United States could have would be to try and stop the Chinese economy from becoming number one. Of course, yes, you can try, but you're not likely to succeed at all. Because, the Chinese, even if they grow at 5 or 6%, will eventually become a bigger economy than the United States. So you can see all these objectives are not feasible. So the question, therefore, is what is the United States trying to achieve in launching this geopolitical contest? And without clear objectives, that's clearly a geopolitical mistake that has been made by the United States. So you can see the mistakes made by China and the mistakes made by United States. So all this brings me now to the next big question: who will win this contest? And by the way, in the Golkar Institute, I can speak to you and I can ask the question, who will win? But if I was giving this lecture in the United States of America, to an American audience and I said, hey, who will win this contest? The Americans would be very puzzled. You see, what kind of question is that? Of course, America will win. Because America always wins. And the Americans are right. For the last 130 years, every geopolitical contest that the United States has engaged in, it has won, right? It won World War I, it won World War II, it won the Cold War. So Americans have never lost. So for most Americans, the idea that they could lose is inconceivable. Never. America cannot lose. So the Americans are convinced that they can only win and they cannot lose. And I'll tell you why they believe that is the case. They believe that at the end of the day, this is a contest between a vibrant liberal democracy in the United States and a rigid communist party system in China. And the big lesson that Americans learned from the Cold War is that a liberal democracy will always outperform a Chinese rigid communist party system. And in theory, the Americans are not wrong. I mean, democracies tend to be vibrant, tend to be dynamic, tend to be innovative, tend to change, tend to adapt, and that's true. So I would say if this really is the contest within a vibrant democracy and a rigid communist party system, it's conceivable that the United States can win. But one of the main contributions my book makes to this discussion on US and China is that it shows that if you dig deeper down beneath the surface, what you're seeing is a contest between not a vibrant democracy and a rigid communist party system. On the United States, the vibrant democracy has become a plutocracy. And in the case of China, the communist party system has become a meritocracy. So this is a contest between a plutocracy and a meritocracy. And in a contest between a plutocracy and a meritocracy can win. So let me explain what is a plutocracy. Now, a democracy, as you know, the definition of a democracy, it is that it is a government of the people, by the people, for the people. So it's a government of the 100%, by the 100%, for the 100%. And if that is what the American system is, then it would be a vibrant democracy. But America functionally has become a plutocracy so that it is no longer a government of the 100%, by the 100%, for the 100%. It's a government of the 1%, by the 1%, for the 1%. So what's happened in America in the last 30 years is that as America's economy has grown, it has grown significantly, all the rewards are going to the top 1%, and the bottom 50%, and this is the most shocking statistic about the United States of America, the bottom 50% have not seen an improvement in their standard of living for over 30 years. And if you look at chapter 7 of my book, it is documented in great detail, giving you data after data. And of course, this is also confirmed by other eminent American writers and thinkers. So for example, I'm not the only person calling the United States system a plutocracy. The former head of the Fed, a very distinguished American, was a friend of mine, the late Paul Volcker, called America a plutocracy. The Nobel Prize winner Joseph Stiglitz has called America a plutocracy. One of the best-known writers in the West, Martin Wolf of the Financial Times, he has also called America a plutocracy. And, you know, if you want a more recent book, There's a book by another Nobel laureate, Angus Deaton, called Deaths of Despair, where he shows how the living standards of the white working classes in America have not improved. In fact, it has gone worse. And of course, further proof is provided by the fact that Donald Trump was elected president of the United States in 2016. And one reason why Donald Trump was elected president in 2016 is because he understood the anger of the white working classes, and he told the white working classes, I understand your anger, I'm with you. And of course, that's why they voted for him, because they knew that Donald Trump would kick the establishment in New York and Washington, D.C. So that you can see there's a lot of proof that America has genuinely become a plutocracy, and therefore it has an angry country with it. And on the other side, in the case of China, the way China has become a meritocracy is that today the Chinese Communist Party has been able to attract some of the best and brightest minds in China to come and work for the Chinese Communist Party. And indeed, the selection process is quite remarkable. And I would say that the Golkar Institute should study what China does in terms of recruiting talent to join the party, because it's the quality of mind of people in the Chinese government is absolutely amazing. And again, if you want proof that it is amazing, it is shown in the economic growth rates of China. It shows very competent economic management, but it's also shown in the way that China has managed its social challenges. So, for example, the greatest poverty reduction program in human history has been carried out by the Chinese Communist Party. And when Deng Xiaoping launched his reforms in 1979, there were 800 million Chinese people, more than double the population. I think more like over three times the population of Indonesia were living in poverty in China. And now it's gone from 800 million people to zero. And that, to be able to rescue 800 million people from poverty is quite a remarkable achievement. And it shows you the competence with which China has developed its Chinese Communist Party. So you can see, therefore, when it comes to the question of who will win, it is not so straightforward that the United States will definitely win and that China will definitely lose. By the same time, and this is a very important point, I also begin my book Has China Won by alerting the Chinese people and Chinese government, whatever you do, don't underestimate the United States of America. Because the United States of America also is a remarkably dynamic society. Yes, it has become a plutocracy, but it's also a very dynamic and innovative country. And so, for example, when I talk about China becoming a plutocracy, the Chinese Communist Party, the Chinese government can look for the best brains among 1.4 billion people and bring them to the top and then have very good governance in China. But in the case of the United States of America, even though its population of 313 million people is smaller, 1/4 that of China, but nonetheless, the American society and American business can find the best brains among 7.8 billion people in the world, right? So, in some ways, America has got a greater pool of brain power. And that's why you see in America, some of the biggest companies in America are run by people not born in America. Like, for example, Sundar Pichai, the head of Google, was born in India. Satya Nadella, the head of Microsoft, was born in India. So you can see how the United States can attract talent from all over the world to come to America. And therefore, that's why America still remains a very dynamic and competitive economy. So it would be a huge mistake for China to underestimate the United States of America. And this is a very nice point in which I can segue to my next point about the Ukraine war, because the Ukraine war has also, in some ways, one key point that has emerged from the Ukraine war is don't underestimate the United States of America. And I will now talk about this part 4 about the Ukraine war. But I want to begin by emphasizing one important fact. Today, the date is 16th of March, right? About 3-4 weeks ago, let's say on 23rd February, one day before the Russian invasion, let's say we are having a discussion between the Golkar Institute and me. And if on 23rd February you had asked me, or you had asked any expert, will Russia launch a full-scale invasion of Ukraine? And the experts, including me, would say, no, 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 no. Russia will not mount a full-scale invasion. That's too risky. Russia may take some more territory in Crimea, may take some more territory in eastern Ukraine, but it will not mount a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And to everybody's surprise, that's exactly what Russia and Putin did. That was the first surprise. The second surprise was this. After the invasion started, if you had asked me who would win, I say, of course Russia would win. Of course Putin would win. Russia is so much more powerful. Ukraine is a very weak country. Russians got so many tanks. Russian tanks would just march straight into Kiev and the war would be over in 2-3 days. But as you know, it is now 3 to 4 weeks and the war is not over. In fact, the Russian army is bogged down. It's quite surprising how well the Ukrainians are fighting. As again, a big surprise, right? And then thirdly, if you had asked me, would the Europeans, unite very strongly and launch a coordinated economic assault on Russia, I would say no. The Europeans are very divided. They wouldn't agree to anything. And to my absolute surprise, Europe and the United States have come together in a very strong way and actually mounted a very effective economic sanction regime on Russia, which has been very, very painful. And as you know, the Russian economy has gone down dramatically, the ruble has collapsed, and it shows you the power of the West. And let me mention that this re-galvanization of Western solidarity, which is a surprise in many ways, is a setback for China also. Because China, as part of its strategy to manage American pressure on China, was trying to deal with the United States separately from Europe. And they were telling Europe, oh, we are separate. You are separate. Even if we have a contest with the United States, we will still have good relations with Europe. But now, with the re-galvanization of Western solidarity, it is actually a setback for China. So you can see this is a surprising development that China has to deal with now. So as a result of all this, I'm sure the Chinese who had worked out a strategy of how to manage the United States before the Ukraine war now have to change and reconsider what are the things that the United States can do to really damage China. And I'll give you 2 examples. I think 2 of the most powerful sanctions that the United States has deployed against Russia. Number 1, it has frozen half of the reserves of the Central Bank of Russia. Now, this is very surprising, The Central Bank of Russia is a sovereign entity. In theory, Western countries cannot take away the money of another sovereign entity, but they have done so. Now, Russia only has $630 billion. China has $3.2 trillion, 5 times as much. Can you imagine what would China do if United States and Europe froze half the reserves of China? That is $1.6 trillion. That's a lot of money, huh? $1.6 trillion, right? Maybe I think the bigger than the size of the economy of Indonesia, but I may be wrong. So can you imagine? So that's another big setback for China. And then, of course, the West has also cut off technological supplies to Russia. So Russian aircraft, huh? Russia has bought lots of Boeing aircraft, Airbus aircraft. Now no spare parts. That's a big problem because Russia is a big country, even bigger than Indonesia. So can you imagine in Indonesia, you don't have planes. How do you go from one part of Indonesia to another part of Indonesia? Very difficult. This is where Singapore, luckily, is very small. You don't need a plane to fly from the east coast of Singapore to the west coast of Singapore. You can drive. But Indonesia is a big country, and Russia is a big country. So sanctions like that can be very damaging. So you can see, therefore, that the Ukraine war has suddenly raised major questions and changed the strategic equations. But it is too early to tell what will be the long-term effect because the war is still carrying on. And we don't know what the outcome is still going to be 3 to 4 weeks from now. Either Russia will win completely and conquer Ukraine and President Zelensky leaves Ukraine. President Zelensky, by the way, has emerged as a real hero. We can discuss that too. Or Russia will fail. And this is something you will find out in 3 to 4 weeks or 3 to 4 months' time. We have to wait and see. But there's no question whatsoever that the Ukraine episode has changed the global geopolitical equation, and therefore we have to watch it very, very carefully. So finally, let me come to the last part about what the world should do in response to all this. And I think this is where the chairmanship of Indonesia of the G20 becomes very, very important. I think when the first meeting of the G20 leaders takes place under Indonesia's chairmanship, I think it'd be good for Indonesia to have a closed-door meeting, only among the leaders. No press, nobody else. And the leaders should ask themselves candidly, could this war in Ukraine have been prevented? And I think it could have been prevented, sadly. I'm about, in 2 weeks' time, I'm going to receive an honorary doctorate from the Macau University of Science and Technology. And I'll be delivering something called the Ambassadorial Lecture. And in the Ambassadorial Lecture, I hope to explain in great detail how this war could have been avoided through better diplomacy. So therefore, I hope that the G20 meeting under Indonesia's chairmanship will study very carefully this Ukraine contest, and the leaders should ask themselves, why did we fail to stop this contest? Because it is damaging everybody. And that kind of candid discussion would be very good. And at the same time, I think the G20 meeting should also, the world leaders should also tell the leaders of the United States and Russia, who will be present, by the way, at the G20 meeting, that the world still has more important problems to deal with. We still haven't got rid of COVID-19. And as you know, COVID-19 is coming back in a big way in some countries like China, for example. China's zero COVID policy is struggling. It's a big challenge for China. And at the same time, we still have to deal with climate change. So there are still major challenges coming. And I hope that Indonesia's G20 chairmanship would remind the world leaders that we should stop this war in Ukraine, have a ceasefire, stop it, agree on a compromise formula, and we can discuss what that compromise formula might be. And then so that the world can focus on rescuing the world from COVID-19, rejuvenate the global economy, and everybody will be better off, including Indonesia and the ASEAN countries. So why don't I stop there and spend the remaining 45 minutes answering your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Kishore. I also have questions for you, but a lot of the audience here has submitted their questions, and it's pretty interesting questions, actually. Some afraid of the war in Ukraine and Russia might affect the region. It's stated here, Indonesia, Australia. I would say it will never happen. However, will at China and Taiwan, that can also something to be concerned about, or should we be concerned about with what's going on with Russia and Ukraine? Should we be concerned about China and Taiwan? And also, the second question is, as the presidency of G20, we will have Biden, Xi Jinping, and then Putin in one stage, whether it's offline or online. How can we play the upper hand role, I guess, to just to talk things through, I guess, with what's going on right now? Or does it really matter if Indonesia plays its role in G20 when it comes to the crisis in Europe right now? Go ahead, Professor.
Well, I think you raised 3 points. One is Indonesia, Australia. One is China, Taiwan. And number 3, about the G20 leaders meeting. What happens when you have Biden, Putin, and Xi Jinping sharing the same stage? 3 very good questions. And I agree with you, in Indonesia and Australia, there will not be a war between Indonesia and Australia. You have good relations and so on and so forth. But at the same time, Indonesia and Australia are choosing a different paths, geopolitical paths. Indonesia wants to have good ties with the United States, and Indonesia wants to have good ties with China. So Indonesia is, not taking sides in this US-China contest. In the case of Australia, the current Australian government is clearly taking sides. The current Australian government is taking United States side completely and is in many ways opposed to China significantly and carrying out measures that, as you know, have really upset the Chinese government. So Australia has joined the Quad. The Quad is a group of United States, Japan, Australia, and India, and it is perceived to be an anti-China alliance. And as you know, no ASEAN country has joined the Quad. Similarly, Australia has signed something called AUKUS, Australia, UK, US, as an alliance to share submarine technology. So that also is an anti-China move. So there will be, in a sense, a gap between Indonesia's policies on US-China and Australia's policies on US-China. And Indonesia and Australia will have to manage those differences very carefully. So that will be the challenge in the Indonesia-Australia relationship. And then in the case of China and Taiwan, that's a very complicated subject. Many people believe that if Russia succeeds, if Putin succeeds in invading Ukraine, succeeds in conquering Ukraine, and the United States cannot stop Russia from doing so, then I think people will say China will invade Taiwan and take over Taiwan also. I don't think so. I don't think China has made it very clear. It will only invade and occupy Taiwan if Taiwan declares independence. And that's a certainty. If Taiwan declares independence, China will definitely invade because China believes that Taiwan is part of China. But if Taiwan doesn't declare independence and Taiwan says that it is still Republic of China, and Taiwan maintains the fiction that Taiwan is the representative of all of China, then it's good for China Taiwan relations, because both agree that China and Taiwan are one country. So there's no reason to go to war. But nonetheless, the situation between China and Taiwan could become more dangerous. And unfortunately, it became more dangerous when the former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, he was in Taiwan a few weeks ago, and he said that the United States should recognize Taiwan as an independent country. If that were to happen, then there'll be war between China and Taiwan. So I think it's very important for all countries to maintain the status quo. So what we in ASEAN should do is quietly advise US and China to maintain the status quo and not change it. And finally, your third question about what does Indonesia do when Biden, Putin, and Xi Jinping appear on the stage. I think if they are speaking publicly, they have to attack each other. Because you know why? They have to speak to their domestic audiences. So if Biden is not seen criticizing Putin publicly, his fellow Americans will say, Joe Biden, you're very weak, you're very weak. That's why I said earlier that they should meet in closed doors with no press around. And if there are no pressmen around, then they can speak frankly and candidly to each other. And I have been present. I was present at the first APEC leaders meeting in 1993 on Blake Island, hosted by President Bill Clinton. And when the meeting began, there was a lot of tension between the United States and China because President Bill Clinton had just been elected in 1992. And during his election campaign, President Bill Clinton had attacked China mercilessly. And President Bill Clinton had said in his election campaign, he said, I will have nothing to do with the butchers of Beijing. And what he meant by the phrase butchers of Beijing, he said he was attacking the leaders of Beijing for suppressing the Tiananmen demonstrations brutally in 1989. So when the meeting began in November 1993 in Blake Island, everyone thought that President Bill Clinton and President Jiang Zemin would fight each other because Bill Clinton had said, I will not accept the butchers of Beijing. But I can tell you, because it was in a tent, literally in a tent, big tent, and it was closed, there were no pressmen down there. President Bill Clinton was very charming and very nice to President Jiang Zemin, to everybody's surprise. So you can see, in the closed doors, people can be diplomatic. And that's why Indonesia, under President Jokowi, should try to organize, if possible, a meeting in person of the leaders in the closed door. And in the closed door, I think there'll be pressure from the other leaders to also tell Biden and Putin, why didn't you avoid this war? Why didn't you find a compromise formula? So Saudi Arabia, for example, could tell, Saudi Arabia is a friend of the United States, in some ways also a friend of Russia, would tell both of them, stop this fighting. And many other countries in private will also say to United States and Russia, stop this fighting. It's bad for all of us. Both of you should compromise. And that's why it's very important that Indonesia organizes this closed door meeting. And in this closed door meeting, get all the other world leaders to apply pressure on United States and Russia to say, stop this fighting. And it can be done effectively in a closed door setting. Thank you.
Thank you. We have question from Aldelita Putri Balkis Romulia. She's one of the attendees here offline with us. her question is actually about Palestine. And this is, I would like to take one step further with this question, because the question is about why didn't the US take an active response to the invasion of Palestine? See, here's the thing. With me, with Indonesian audience, I mean, our president hasn't stated anything strong in terms of the crisis in Ukraine. I think I only saw like an Instagram post regarding this. While Singapore government, they already sanctioned Moscow. So it's a pretty bold move coming from ASEAN country or from Asia Pacific, I guess. I don't know, maybe Japan already has done something. But Indonesia hasn't stated anything firm regarding this. But when it comes to Palestine or Myanmar with Rohingya or other crisis related to any Muslim communities or countries, then we will say something strong about it. So how do you see this, Professor? I'm just wondering, should we state it something, take a bolder action, or do we want to position ourselves as the democratic Muslim majority country that has to say about anything related to is a Muslim country? How do you see the Indonesian positioning, I guess, regarding this issue?
Well, again, a very good question. And I'm going to give away a big secret, that the Western countries have double standards. They notice some violations of international law, and they don't notice other violations of international law. And there are many examples. Huh? So, for example, the Europeans are very angry that Russia has invaded Ukraine in violation of international law. It's true. Russia has violated international law in invading Ukraine. But also, United States violated international law in 2003 when it invaded Iraq. Because under international law, you can only invade another country either if it is an act of self-defense or if it is endorsed by UN Security Council. So the United States invasion of Iraq was not an act of self-defense, was not endorsed by the UN Security Council, and therefore it's a violation of international law. But did any European country impose sanctions on the United States? No. And when the United States carried out torture in Guantanamo, again, the European countries kept quiet. So they have double standards. So I encourage you, you can download a free copy of my book, The Asian 21st Century. And the first chapter is called The Hypocrisy of the West. The Hypocrisy of the West. So read it. And you'll discover that there are double standards. And Palestine is a good example also of double standards, this is why it's very important to have this closed door meeting of the G20 leaders. Because in a closed door, the leaders can speak frankly to the United States and to Russia and to China and to everybody else and say that, everybody's got double standards, right? So just as, you accept the reality that you cannot change the occupation of Palestine. You cannot, because the United States guarantees the security of Israel over Palestine, right? And you can't change it. So these are the issues you can raise in the G20 meeting, but privately. And therefore, in the private meeting, you can try to get compromises among the interested parties on these issues. And certainly, and your second part of the question was on Singapore. Singapore, by the way, Singapore's position should not surprise anybody. Because, Singapore, as you know, is one of the smallest countries in the world. I think Singapore is smaller than Batam or Bintan, So as a result of that, Singapore takes international law very seriously. And therefore, when in Singapore, I was at a Singapore ambassador to the UN, whenever there's a violation of international law, we speak out against it. So Singapore's position is not surprising. But in the case of Indonesia, Indonesia, of course, also voted in favor of the resolution to condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But Indonesia can also play a useful mediation role within the G20 setting. And I hope that in the closed door meeting, Indonesia can encourage a frank discussion and also bring out the double standards of every country on these issues. Thank you.
Very well. The next question is from Danti Purnamasari. Mana Mbak Danti? Hi, Mbak Danti. Mbak Danti is asking a question regarding US and China relation. Go straight to your question, to Professor Kishore.
Good morning, Prof. Kishore. My name is Dandy. It was nice meeting you. It is an honor for me to ask you this question directly. Well, the topic about China and US relationship, always the hottest topic. And the two largest economies of the world were already needed in a trade war and tech war also, right? And even when the COVID-19 was spread out for the first time, the two countries both sides like accusing each other. So, do you think these two superpower countries one day will make a peace? Because whatever these two countries do, it will affect, the impact will affect the other countries in the world, for sure. Thank you.
And Professor Kishore, you also mentioned in an interview, I watched the interview of you on NPR, actually I listened to it, and you're saying that if the US, the main competitor is China. If your main competitor is China, do not provoke Russia. I was like very intrigued with that statement. Like, oh, okay, so what is wrong with provoking Russia and what's the connection with China, I guess? That's connected to Dante's question.
Yeah, two very good questions. The first one as to whether or not United States and China will make peace towards each other. I think the likelihood is that United States and China will not go to direct war with each other. Because in a nuclear war, both sides will lose. United States will lose 10 to 15 cities. China will lose 30 to 40 cities. So both sides will lose, right, in a nuclear war. And therefore, I don't think there'll be an all-out war between US and China. But short of a war, the contest between US and China will accelerate, for sure, because it's driven by a geopolitical logic. The United States doesn't want to become the number 2 power in the world. And because it doesn't want to become the number 2 power in the world, it will try and stop China in one way or another. So the next 10 years, the US-China geopolitical contest will accelerate. But at the same time, we, the other countries, and that's why in my book, Has China Won? If you look in my last chapter, I say that other parts of the world, like ASEAN, the ASEAN countries should tell US and should tell China two things. Number one, the world has more important things to take care of, like COVID-19, like climate change. Can you please stop your contest? Press the pause button for a while. Let us fight our common challenges like COVID and like climate change. And at the same time, the ASEAN countries can tell both sides, we want to be friends of the United States and we want to be friends of China. Don't ask us to choose sides. We want to be friends with both. And that's a common, I think, ASEAN position of all the countries in ASEAN. So ASEAN should speak out more forcefully. So I hope at the G20 meeting also, the same message can be conveyed to the leaders of US and China also. Now, the next one on the question of Russia, in theory, frankly, since the United States' number one worry is China, Russia is not the number one worry for United States, okay? Russia will never become stronger and more powerful than United States. No way. In fact, the Russian economy is less than 1/10 the size of the American economy. But China could become bigger than the American economy. So in theory, if you have three powers, in the Cold War, one of the brilliant things that American diplomats did was that instead of the United States facing Russia and China together, right, they divided Russia and China. And they got China to join the United States against the Soviet Union. That was a brilliant diplomatic move. Today, if the number one competitor of United States is China, United States should try and divide Russia and China, right? It should try. But unfortunately, this Ukraine episode has pushed Russia and China closer together in some ways. So in that sense, it is a setback for the United States. But at the same time, as I said earlier, the United States is now feeling stronger because it's got Europe on its side. So when you look at a question like Ukraine, its impact on the geopolitical equation is very complex. So on the one hand, United States may have lost because Russia and China have come together. On the other hand, United States may have won because Europe and United States have become closer together. And Europe, as you know, is a much, much bigger economy than Russia also. So the combination of United States and Europe creates a formidable economic force. And that's why they've been so successful with their economic sanctions. And this is something that obviously China is going to pay attention to. So at the end of the day, we have to wait and see what will be the final outcome. But it is, of course, conceivable that United States will feel it is much stronger after the Ukraine episode is over.
Very well. Vanessa Supit. Vanessa, hi, Vanessa. Vanessa is asking about the crisis in Ukraine and then the impact to Indonesia. And regarding the commodity, ask that question, Vanessa, to Professor.
Yeah, well, our position is neutral and we don't take any sides. But assuming we take one side, will it be easier for us to get commodities, like because the prices are higher now for gasoline and oil? What would be the impact if we choose either one side? Thank you.
Yeah, I guess with in a correlation to the global chain and supply issue, Professor, because it is already difficult for us right now, and I guess it's a worldwide issue. But how big is the impact that we should be aware about regarding this, rising high prices?
Well, I think number one, if Indonesia takes sides, it will have no impact on commodity prices. Unfortunately, commodity prices are determined by global market forces. And right now, because as you know, Europe has imposed some sanctions on Russia, and United States and UK have stopped buying Russian oil. That has clearly disrupted the global energy market. But the price of these commodities is a global price. It's influenced by global forces. So whatever side you take, you will still be. So for example, take India, for example, right? India actually has been very neutral in this contest between United States and Russia on Ukraine. In fact, United States is very angry with India. The United States says to India, you're a member of the Quad, you should join us against Russia. But Russia has been a good friend of India, so India doesn't want to take sides. Now, but India doesn't want to take sides, but the Indian economy is still badly hit by the rise in energy prices, because India is a major importer of oil from the world. It is a net energy importer. So the Indian economy will suffer in terms of, in fact, this year was supposed to be a very good year for Indian economic growth. Now it won't be so good because of global commodity prices. But that's another reason why the G20 countries should speak out in private to United States and Russia on the Ukraine issue, because we should tell them, this contest between the two of you is also hurting us. It's also hurting us. Our commodity prices are going up and our people are suffering. So I think people in Indonesia have to pay more for palm oil, for example, right? And so that's going to be also going to damage Indonesia's economic growth. But the only point I want to emphasize is that whether Indonesia takes sides or doesn't take sides, you will still be affected by the slowdown in the global economy, which is why, by the way, if the G20 leaders can persuade United States and Russia to stop this contest on Ukraine, the world economy will bounce back very fast and commodity prices will go down. So if Indonesia wants to have lower commodity prices for its people, it should use the G20 meeting to tell the United States and Russia to stop this contest, and then the people of Indonesia will be better off. They will get lower commodity prices.
Okay, very well. I would like to also greet, we have audience who are joining us from Zoom, by Zoom. Hi everyone, and thank you for your questions. We have great questions here. Okay, this is related, I'm gonna pick one. This is related to your article about our president, Jokowi. I think we discussed about this as well, but since we have a different audience, maybe it's worth to share the insights from this. Your piece in Project Syndicate was accused as a biased and inaccurate view of President Jokowi's achievement. And some of his friends, this is from Peran, called it an good example of a premature eulogy for President Jokowi, and some of us compare it to Pericles' funeral oration of the fallen heroes. Okay, that's pretty harsh. However, meaning like a lot of us are not happy with what the president is doing. Okay, the new capital city is one of the issue, and many other stuff. But I always want people to know with a helicopter view what the global scene is looking at when they see Jokowi, And since we have a different audience here, maybe you can share the same perspective again, what should we know that we don't know as a domestic market about the worldview of Jokowi? Professor.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I hope I did not say that President Jokowi is a perfect leader. There are no perfect leaders in the world. All leaders are imperfect. But you must judge President Jokowi not against a theoretical standard of governance, but against other real life examples of leaders. So, for example, if you look at his record as a president so far, after 8 years, he has delivered political stability, he has delivered economic growth, and he has delivered a quiet society. There have been no riots, demonstrations, major riots and demonstrations. Just take those three things, okay? Now, let's compare Indonesia first with its neighbors, okay? Now, your most immediate neighbor is Malaysia. Look at Malaysia's track record over the last 5 to 6 years. How many prime ministers has Malaysia had in the last 5 years? how many allegations of major corruption in Malaysia, right? Malaysia is today politically unstable. So you compare Indonesia, politically stable, Malaysia, politically unstable. So you can see President Jokowi has done a better job. And then you're going to go to another country that is your neighbor. Look at Thailand, right? Thailand started the democratic experiment before Indonesia, right? Thailand was not colonized by any great power. It's been independent for so long. But Thailand today is politically unstable. And Indonesia is politically stable. So you compare, who is doing better? Now, if you want to go to Myanmar, Myanmar today is a very badly divided country, right? Indonesia used to have a military government, but now it has a stable democracy. Myanmar had a military government, had a democracy, and then went back to military government. So Myanmar has failed, okay? And then if you want to compare with other countries, let's compare with India. Now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is very, very popular in India. He keeps winning a lot of elections in India. But if you notice, there are also a lot of criticisms of Prime Minister Modi because the country is divided in some ways, right? Whereas President Jokowi has unified the country in significant ways. And also, if you want to compare President Jokowi with Prime Minister Scott Morrison of Australia, Prime Minister Scott Morrison has really alienated China, has made China very angry towards Australia. President Jokowi has good ties with President Joe Biden and has good ties with President Xi Jinping. That shows he's a statesman. He can handle different great powers. So you look at the real record, and therefore I ask a very simple question. Which democratically elected leader today has done a better job than President Jokowi? I hope somebody can give me the answer.
Anyone care to answer? Thank you, Professor. We have a lot of questions actually from the audience here about your article too. I hope that answers your questions. Buat yang belum sempat untuk nulis di Slido, ada yang ingin memberikan pertanyaan, I would like to give the opportunity to the floor untuk bertanya langsung to Professor Kishore. Since we are growing the next political leaders of Indonesia, let's hear their voice. Namanya dari siapa Pak, and then dari mana? Pak Indra, dari mana Pak Indra? Langsung Pak.
Ya, terima kasih. Thank you, Mr. Prof. Kishore. My name is Indra from South Sulawesi. I hope you know.
It's where Yusuf Kala is from.
Yes, exactly.
I have been there.
Oh, good.
I've been to...
Yeah, I know you was born in Singapore, but I think you're Indian descent, I guess. That's why directly I want to ask about, this is a similarly about neighbor country like India and Pakistan, Russia and Ukraine in trending now. I want asking about Indonesia and Australia, maybe Indonesia and Filipina or Malaysia. If possible, happen also war neighbor like Pakistan, India, and Russia and Ukraine. I think that's it.
So the question is it possible,
if possible, happen also
for Indonesia
Russia
to have a war with
Yeah.
our neighboring countries?
Yes, yes, yes.
I hope it will never happen. I would like to come back to Singapore anytime soon, since it's
Yes,
open
maybe
now
with
for
the Singapore
vaccinated
also.
travelers. Yeah. So, Professor, I think there is a growing concern in among Indonesians. If something happened to Russia and Ukraine as a neighboring country, oh, can we be at war with, I don't know, Malaysia maybe? We're always at up against each other anyway, you know, so there is that growing fear. But yeah, we need your point of view to make sense of it all, you know, whether it's possible or not.
Well, you know, as I mentioned, I was very surprised that the war took place between Russia and Ukraine. I was surprised. I didn't expect President Putin to launch an all-out invasion of Ukraine. That came as a surprise to me. So it's always possible that you could have war between, let's say, Indonesia and Malaysia. But I would say the prospects are very, very, very low, almost impossible. For one reason, okay, we have not used this word very often so far today, and that word is ASEAN. ASEAN is the second most successful regional organization in the world after the European Union. And as you know, the prospects of war between any two European Union states, whether France and Germany or UK and France, is zero. Zero. So similarly, within ASEAN, it is not quite zero, but almost zero. And you know, I would encourage the members of the audience to read my book, The ASEAN Miracle, which came out in 2017, and which has been published in Bahasa Indonesia. You can read it in Bahasa Indonesia. It's called The ASEAN Miracle. And actually, if you read the book, you will find the one country that deserves the most amount of credit for the success of ASEAN is Indonesia. Because Indonesia has exported its culture of musyawarah and mufakat to to strengthen ASEAN. And I can tell you that if there had been a culture of musyawarah mufakat between United States, Russia, Ukraine, and Europe, the war would have been prevented in Ukraine. But unfortunately, there was no musyawarah and mufakat between Russia and Ukraine or Russia and United States. And that's why you had this war happening in Ukraine. So I would say, yes, you should worry about the possibility of war in Southeast Asia. But right now, the prospects of war are very low. And also, I want to add a very important point here. You know, a country like Russia with so much military power cannot conquer Ukraine. So it shows you that military wars are very hard to win, even if you have a lot of military power. And similarly, the United States has got even more military power, but it failed in Iraq. Failed. Americans died. Many Americans died in Iraq. So you can see, therefore, the lesson of the Russia-Ukraine war is that don't go to war. And I hope all countries in Southeast Asia would learn that lesson from the Ukraine war. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor, as a conclusion, you would like to ask a question? Oh, okay. So we have one of your students, Professor, who would like to ask a question. Hopefully it's the last one, okay? Since we're running out of time. Silakan.
Professor Kishore, about ASEAN, you wrote a book on the ASEAN Miracle, and I think it's one of the great cases that all of us here need to learn as well. Many of us here, you know, we are in ASEAN, but we are not very well aware of how powerful it is as a vehicle for international cooperation, and also as the lessons learned that we have from ASEAN. And how would you say, like, what could ASEAN learn from what's going on in Europe, and what could Europe, for example, learn from what ASEAN has become?
I would say both ASEAN and Europe can learn from each other. And in the case of ASEAN, what we should learn from Europe is the achieving what I call zero prospect of war. So, you know, as you know, even though, by the way, I must emphasize this, the Europeans have fought much bigger wars with each other than ASEAN countries have fought with each other. We didn't have World War I, we didn't have World War II in the way the Europeans did. But despite the fact that Europeans have fought much bigger wars with each other, today there's zero prospect of war between UK and France and Germany, or Spain and France, any two European countries, no danger of war. So we must achieve the same thing in ASEAN. And that's why, by the way, I have launched something called the Asian Peace Program at the National University of Singapore. You can Google it, Asian Peace Program at National University of Singapore. And you can see that's what we are trying to do in Southeast Asia to also achieve zero prospect of war here. Now, in the case of Europeans, what the Europeans can learn from ASEAN is that you must not just bring peace within your own countries, but also around your neighborhood. And the European Union has failed to keep peace in the Balkans. There was a major war in Yugoslavia, which was a proxy war among the European Union states. There has been a war also nearby in Libya. And so you can see that all kinds of conflicts in the Middle East, conflicts in the neighborhood of European Union. So the European Union should learn from ASEAN how to create what I call ASEAN Plus organizations. So ASEAN, for example, has created the East Asian Summit, and at the East Asian Summit, leaders that distrust each other. I'll give you an example. The Japanese and South Koreans have great difficulty talking to each other bilaterally. They hate each other. I'm not exaggerating. But within the East Asian Summit created by ASEAN, Japan and South Korea can talk to each other. So that's what the Europeans should learn from ASEAN. And I hope that the Europeans, after what happened in Ukraine, should ask themselves, why is it Europe has failed to stop wars around Europe, whereas ASEAN has succeeded in stopping wars around ASEAN. So both Europe and ASEAN can learn from each other. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Kishore Mahbubani. Thank you very much for your time, for sharing your perspectives and thoughts. Hopefully, it will be beneficial for all of us here with us in Golkar Institute, also who are joining us on Zoom. Thank you. Have a great week ahead. Thank you very much, Professor Kishore.
Thank you.
Acara saya
Bye-bye.
kembalikan ke Mas Muli. Silakan, Mas Muli.
Yeah. Thank you, Prof. Kishore. Okay,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you for attending, and thank you for joining this class. For those of you who are in Zoom as well, we will pause our session for about half an hour, 30 minutes, and then we will come back at 10:30 Indonesia time, Jakarta time, to have the next session of the Executive Education Program for Young Political Leaders, where we will learn about public speaking with Andini Effendi. So stay tuned and come back here at 10:30. Sampai ketemu.